I'm back home. Right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our session on leveraging social annotation in the age of AI. I did put the link to the slides in the chat. I'm going to pop it in there again so that anyone who just joined can have access to those. I will share the recording and the slides after the session as well. So I'm going to start by talking about what ChatGPT really is and what also social annotation is. So we're going to kind of like lay our foundation for everything, examine why students might turn to AI, and then I'll get into more how can we actually use social annotation in this new world that we live in where AI tools are the hot new thing. I will give you also a demo in Canvas of how to set up a hypothesis assignment. So please feel free to ask questions throughout, whether that is through unmuting or using the chat, not like married to my presentation slides here. So happy to address questions. We don't have to wait until the end. My name is Christy DeCarolis. I'm a customer success manager here, and I'm an instructional designer. Been working with faculty for about a decade. And I also adjunct and I use Hypothesis in my own courses. I am based out of Southern New Jersey. I am right outside of Philly. So if I tend to kind of gaze off into the distance or start forgetting my words, it's because it's the end of the day here. And my brain is starting to, the neurons are not firing correctly any longer. So, but I am here to help, and I'm excited to see what y'all are thinking. So first, I want to see what polls do we have here. I want to give everyone the chance before we get into this. If you could share what you teach in the chat, that would be super helpful. And I also want to see what your experience with Hypothesis has been. So I'm going to launch a poll. So I'm asking you to do many things at one time, and please forgive me for this. We're typing in the chat what we teach and also participating in the poll. Gives me some context for where we're all coming from, and you know, make sure we cover all of our bases here. So I mentioned that I also adjunct. I teach a gender studies class called Gender and Technology. So ChatGPT is not only kind of blowing up my teaching strategies, but like I also have to think about how I'm going to incorporate it as a topic in my class. All right, we have lots of different disciplines here today: digital media, chemistry, history, anatomy and physiology, English composition. We are really covering the bases. So, and we also are covering the bases with our poll here. We have people who have lots of experience with Hypothesis, and then some people who don't know what it is. So I promise I'm going to show you what it is. And if you want to share, if you're one of these folks that have used it lots before, if you want to share your own experiences at any point, please feel free. I always want to hear how folks are using it in their own classes. All right, so thank you for your participation. I'm going to start out by just talking about ChatGPT and large language models in general. This is a basic overview. I'm not an expert in AI or large language models. So just a warning, I'm not an expert. I am just trying to provide some kind of background info so we know how these things are actually working, because I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with large language models, which ChatGPT is one. Basically, if you go to the ChatGPT website, it will tell you what it is good at and what it is not so good at. And I will do that, Neil. So I'm going to introduce each one on its own first. ChatGPT, what is ChatGPT? What is Hypothesis? And then we'll do the connection. That's a good question. I think we have to know what each of these things are first alone. So ChatGPT is a large language model. Basically, large language models, all that they're doing is they are fed lots and lots of data. And based on this data, they predict what the most likely next word or phrase or sentence is. So they are basically a statistical prediction tool. They don't know information in the way that sometimes we hear people prescribe, like saying that, like artificial intelligence, it has knowledge. It doesn't have knowledge. It has data and statistical likelihoods about what the next word is. So if you think about something like twinkle, twinkle, little, you might be thinking in your head star, because we might know the song, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. This is what large language models are kind of doing. Like, most commonly, what the next word will be is, and then it spits something out for you. So there are a lot of opportunities in this, and then there's a lot of limitations that are associated with this. So one of the limitations is that because it doesn't actually know things, it can generate incorrect information or produce harmful things. What it can do is engage in a conversation and kind of explain certain things. But again, that can be problematic because of the potential for making up information. ChatGPT will also, because of how it works, it will not produce the same results time after time. So if I go in there, once I went into ChatGPT and I asked, how many female governors of New Jersey have there been? And y'all are not from New Jersey, I'm assuming, so maybe you don't know. We have had one, and ChatGPT told me that there have not been any. But then when I asked it again, it said there was one and who it was. So it's not a consistent, it does not provide consistent answers. So to kind of further elaborate on this, the free version of ChatGPT is a lot more limited than the paid version currently, and this is changing all the time. It can, like I said, respond to prompts and engage in dialogue. Currently, the free version, if you're using ChatGPT and you're not using it through like Bing or something, or like a browser, it can't browse the internet. It is using data from 2021 and prior. This example of citing specific examples or quotes from another text, it can make citations, but they will often be invented. So like it will create a citation for you. Maybe the author is real, but the paper is not real, or the journal is fake or something like that. So it will just invent citations. And it can't fact check things because, again, it doesn't know things. So why are students turning to these large language models, these AI tools for coursework? I think a lot of our students don't actually understand what these tools are doing and think it is kind of like a search engine and a source of information. So they might be turning to these tools because they are experiencing the stresses of life and the demands of their coursework. Perhaps they've fallen behind on materials and they're looking for a resource to help them keep up with their work. So they may have these big assessments coming up, like exams or essays or research papers, and they need something that's going to help them quickly learn what they need to learn so they can produce something for a grade. So in some ways, the way we structure our classes and the way we structure our grading systems can further incentivize students to feel pressured to use these tools, or we can arrange things so that perhaps they don't feel quite as pressured to use these tools. And I'll talk about how hypothesis social annotation can, fit in with that. Any questions before I get into the what is hypothesis piece about the large language models? Or is there anything anybody wanted to add? Because I'm sure someone here has been doing like tons of reading and talk to ChatGPT for like hours. Or has nobody talked to ChatGPT for hours? Is that just me? No, I haven't. I had not chatted for quite that long, just a little bit. We just have some chats. All right, so Richard, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I just had a quick question I mean, I know very little about all of it. Is ChatGTP the only one we should be thinking about? Or are there other, is there like a big three or a big five or, something like that?
Yeah, there are a lot of them. And I don't know if I could define a big three or a big five. That would be useful because it would probably change. So Bing has an AI tool built into it that's built off of ChatGPT. So it's very similar to that. I don't know if I would necessarily differentiate that. Google is releasing something called Bard. To my knowledge, ChatGPT, the paid version of it, is still kind of like the thing that's going to produce the best results at this point. But there are other products out there that folks might be trying out as well. If anyone else has tried out others, you can let me know too. But those are the ones kind of that I'm aware of currently. And of course, there's also been all of this these creations of AI detectors, like Turnitin has like an AI detector now, and those have a lot of limitations and how well they can be used. Even if you ask ChatGPT itself, every time I ask ChatGPT if it wrote something or if a human did, it always tells me like AI wrote it. Like I literally put in a paragraph that I know I wrote, and it was like AI wrote this. So those AI writing tools are often, those AI writing detectors are often very flawed too. Any other thoughts or questions about the AI piece before we shift to the social annotation piece? And then we marry them together. All right, so I'm going to start by looking at what hypothesis is, because a number of you answered that you don't know what hypothesis is. So I am going to hop into this Canvas course and open a document that I have loaded into my Canvas course. I am going to load this reading in a new window. So what I have is just a PDF of an open textbook. So this is a physics open educational resource, a free textbook that's online. I downloaded a PDF of the chapter of the conservation of momentum and loaded that into my Canvas course. So that's what's on the right here. Hypothesis is essentially adding this annotation sidebar on, I just said that this is what I'm saying, guys. I said the reading is on the right. That's the left. Sorry. All right, so we got the reading on the left. We have hypothesis social annotation on the right. This is what happens when I get toward the end of the day. And I want to point out a couple of things about how this works. So on the reading itself, you'll see that there are pieces of the reading that are highlighted. That means a student has annotated that piece of text. So in this case, Jennifer has selected this sentence. And if I hover over her annotation, it'll change colors. So I can see exactly where Jennifer has annotated. And when she's asking this question, I can see exactly what she's referring to in the annotation. And same as I scroll down, as I scroll through the reading, I can hover over these annotations and see exactly what the students are referring to when they're adding annotations. So in this case, Jennifer's annotated a equation, kind of like talking out, like, what is this equation doing? What do I need to solve this? And then someone else, if you notice, I can expand the conversation here. So we had replies to this annotation, and another student comes in and asks a question about why the equation is set up the way it is. And then so they can have a conversation around a specific piece of text. So whether that is a word or a phrase or a sentence, the students can have a conversation around a specific piece of text. And continuing on, you can see more annotations. In this particular instance, I just want to demonstrate another feature of Hypothesis where the annotations, you can embed images and video. So if you encounter something where like a course document does not a great job in this case of defining the law of conservation of momentum, so I can come in, or another student can come in and embed a video, and then we can watch what the law of conservation of momentum looks like without having to leave the reading. So we can bring in all these different pieces and look at it together and keep students engaged with the course material. So this is the basics of what Hypothesis lets me do, and I'll get into the details of how it works with Canvas and what kind of documents we can use and things like that. But really, it's just adding this annotation functionality so that students can have a conversation about the text as they're reading the text. And if I wanted to add an annotation myself, I would just select the text I want to annotate, click the annotate button, and then I can type in, whatever my annotation is, post, and then I can continue reading. So instead of completing the reading as one isolated exercise and then moving on and doing a discussion board or doing an assignment as a separate exercise, the students are actively engaging in the reading as they're completing it. So I'm, like I said, gonna get into a lot of the details of what you can use with Hypothesis, how to set it up in Canvas, and how we can use social annotation in conjunction with this idea of AI coming into play. But before I get into all that, does anyone have any questions about what we're kind of seeing on the screen here? Feel free to either unmute or text chat, whatever you prefer. Okay, cool. So, and if you're still typing, because you could be, that's fine. You can ask questions whenever. So how exactly does Hypothesis work in Canvas? Hypothesis is already available in Canvas. So I'm going to show you kind of where it's hiding in your Canvas course. And the students don't have to create an account or log into another site. They can simply open the document, much like you saw me do. So like I went into assignments, I clicked on an assignment, and I clicked on the button, and I can start annotating. That is what the students do as well. And thank you, Gina. Yes, students can use the Canvas student app to use Hypothesis. They try to access it through the browser. It doesn't work super well, but if they're using the app, they can. The better user experience would be on a larger screen, whether that's a tablet or a computer, because you have more space to read and annotate, but it does work on that. So it's really easy for students to get started because they're not creating an account. They're not being sent to a third-party site. They're annotating within Canvas. Another feature we just added is that you can annotate YouTube video transcripts with Hypothesis as well. So I can demo that as part of this session, but that is now a new type of document, I guess you can call it, that you can have students annotate. The other nice thing about the integration with Canvas is that you can grade the annotations if you want to give them grades with SpeedGrader. So if I open the chemistry assignment I had just seen, SpeedGrader will show me the student in the upper right as it normally would, and it will filter just that student's annotations. So I can just see what one student has contributed to the assignment, and then add a grade, add private feedback here if I want to, and then go on to the next student. Some of my students haven't completed this assignment yet, apparently. And then that will filter out just to that student's annotations. And then finally, you can also use Canvas group sets with Hypothesis. So my class tends to have about 20 to 25 students in it. I usually have all of my students annotate together. So the default setting is that when you set up an annotation assignment, hopping back into this example, all of these annotations are available to everyone in the class. Everyone can see what each other is annotating. That's the default setting. You can use Canvas group sets to make smaller annotation spaces. So if you have a large class, say you have 50 students or hundreds of students, all of those students annotating in one document in one space can get a little bit hectic. So you can create a group set in Canvas, and then it's just one more checkbox when you set up the assignment to create separate annotation spaces. So I got a question about walking through the speed grader example. Yeah, so if I have a student, I think a lot of mine are have grades already. Let's see if I can find one that doesn't have a grade. Maybe my data science one doesn't have a grade. So if I pull up speed grader and I'm looking at a student like Jennifer, I have it's showing she has a submission here. It's showing she's added this one annotation. I can enter my score here and give any private feedback. And then I can navigate to the next student, either using the arrows or, seeing who has the next submission in SpeedGrader here. So Malika has a couple annotations here. It looks like she's added some replies and media. Maybe I'll give Malika a higher score and I can continue on. And you can add a rubric as well that will show up in SpeedGrader if that's something that you would like to do with the annotations. So how does social annotation relate to this whole AI thing? I kind of want to bring it all together now. Consistently using social annotation in your course, I think I'm going to take this from two angles. How can we discourage students from turning to AI immediately? And then how can we also teach students about AI and use social annotation to critique AI and look at what it might be useful for and what its limitations are? So this first piece is looking at how can we kind of discourage students from this immediate turn to, oh, I'll use AI as a solution. Using social annotation in our courses and having students participate in collaborative annotation over their readings emphasizes the process of learning over this final product. So if I have, 3 unit projects in my class, and those major projects are the bulk of the students' grades, they might feel extra pressure in submitting those assignments and the quality of those assignments because there's so much weight on those grades. They're also not getting any incentive for the learning process in getting to those projects. So in completing the readings, they might not see the value of that process because it's this isolated thing that we're not really holding them accountable for. With social annotation, we can kind of bring in this process as a part of our assessment. In my class, I personally use annotation as part of their participation grade. People will set this up in lots of different ways. So there's lots of different ways you can do this, but I personally use it as participation, and it gives them low stakes way to keep engaged with the course materials. So in my own class, I kind of just mark them complete or incomplete if they have completed their annotation assignments, and that keeps them engaged with the readings throughout the course. They have to go into the readings because they're annotating the readings. And then when they come to these greater summative assessments, they have already had some smaller low stakes assessment touch points along the way. As I kind of already mentioned, it encourages continued engagement with the text. So we recently released, I don't think I threw the slide in here. We recently released a case study with UT Austin, where they had 2 physics classes. One class was not using Hypothesis and one class was using Hypothesis. And the class that was using Hypothesis, the students had a median of 36 days engaging with the text throughout the semester. And the class that was not using Hypothesis had a median of 7 days of engagement with the text. So there was a large difference in how frequently the students were actually engaging with the text. And there's also, we'd show when they're using Hypothesis, they engage with the text throughout the semester. And when they don't use Hypothesis, you kind of see this big spike of engagement in the beginning, and then they drop off. And then finally, using Hypothesis cultivates student voice in writing. I think this is also important to kind of get to know. When my students annotate, I can learn how they sound when they write. And then when they are turning in future assignments, I can see things that might sound like not quite what they have written in the past, or maybe they struggled with this and now all of a sudden they're super expert at it. So it gives us kind of a better understanding of where the students are and where their writing is. We like to say that Hypothesis makes reading active, visible, and social. It's asking our students to actively engage in their reading, so they will better retain the information and better comprehend the information instead of if they were passively reading it. So asking them to engage in social annotation is asking them essentially to engage in metacognition. As they read, they need to reflect on, okay, what do I understand? What do I have a question about? How does this connect to what we've learned before? Because that's what they're writing out in their annotations. So we're asking them to actively engage with the text, which will help them better understand and remember. And I do see this in my students' annotations. In week 6, they'll be like, hey, we talked about this in week 3 when we read that article about gender and its relationship with, if you see it as a tool or a toy, they'll connect things across readings in their annotations. It makes reading visible to us as instructors because we can see where students have understanding, where they're missing key concepts, and where they are, like I said, making those connections. And it makes reading social because the students are all annotating together. And this is a piece that in my course evaluations, I see most consistently that the students appreciate. They say that seeing their classmates' annotations help them better interpret the course material and better understand the reading because they kind of get to see it from multiple perspectives. So how do we put this idea into practice of using social annotation with this idea of AI in the back of our heads? As I've kind of been hammering home, using annotation as formative assessment can be really key in ensuring that students are staying engaged with our course materials and then are less likely to feel the need to turn to AI tools when they're coming to a summative assessment like an exam or a paper. So we're scaffolding, we're kind of giving them, small chunks of information to get to what they need. I also think using the annotations as something students can reference can be helpful as well. So can the student annotations themselves become course material that they then reflect upon in a discussion board or in an essay? Because that's something that ChatGPT can't access, right? So they will have to go back into their assignments. I had my students do this with a project. They had to incorporate how their classmates' annotations influenced how they approached the project. I was talking to a professor earlier today who has her students reflect in a discussion board on what they learned from their classmates' annotations. So we can also use the community as the students as experts almost, and have them reflect on how each other are contributing to the greater understanding. And then how can we use AI with Hypothesis and social annotation? I think as I mentioned, I'm not sure students at this point are really aware of how the large language models work and what the limitations of them are. And that makes me concerned for them, because I think they're wading into something that they aren't really sure what they're doing. So as educators, I think we can create things to help them better understand. So can I have ChatGPT write an essay about a topic from my class, and then have my students annotate the essay that ChatGPT wrote? They could critique its writing style. They can fact check it, look for citations. Where did it get things right? Where did it make mistakes? Where were its strengths and weaknesses? We can kind of pull the AI, pull it apart together. We have some AI starter assignments linked in the slides. I know some people have joined since I put the link into the chat. So I'm putting the link in the chat again. These starter assignments are basically assignment instructions that you can adapt in your course. And these are all using ChatGPT output as an idea. So you can have students act as editors, so critiquing its writing style and form. I think it could also be interesting, in addition to just critiquing ChatGPT, is there a student exemplar you could share and have students compare a human written essay to a ChatGPT written essay? And again, what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the differences that you see? I see Neil's questions about the character limit for hypothesis annotation and talking about the group functionality. Yes, I'm going to do all those things when I get into the demo of setting up the assignment. Having students fact check ChatGPT could also be an interesting exercise, and showing how detail oriented they have to be if they're going to be relying on ChatGPT for something, where in the end, it's not really saving them time. For instance, I had ChatGPT generate a biography of a computer scientist who is, I would say she's like mid-level famous, like not like super famous, but not nobody. And it got most of the details of her biography right, but it said she was from Ghana when she was really from like Mississippi or Missouri or something. Like, it just made up a random fact about where she was from, and it invented her birthday. So it will just kind of invent random facts. And I think getting students to cite these things will reveal to them how kind of dangerous it can be to just rely on what ChatGPT is outputting if they're just using it to generate information and not perhaps for other purposes. And then students as content experts. This is similar to fact checking, but I would think of this as more of like, can you get ChatGPT to write something from a specific perspective or using a specific style, and then have the students analyze the accuracy of that. So have ChatGPT argue a certain theory from a specific theorist's point of view, and have the students critique and pick that apart. So all these are links to assignments that you can use in your class. You can copy and paste the assignment. We have some examples of ChatGPT generated text here. So those are all linked there. We also have just regular annotation assignments if you're not interested in using a ChatGPT written text in your course and you just want students to regularly annotate. So these general annotation assignment instructions are very similar to what I use in my own course. I just kind of give students a generic prompt and they annotate each week using this prompt. It is really important to give students an idea of what a meaningful annotation might look like, or else they kind of flounder a little bit, but something like what we have on the website can give some good ideas. So now I'm going to get into the demo and talk a little bit more about the details of hypothesis in Canvas, which Neil was asking about in the chat. So specifically, what kinds of documents can you annotate with hypothesis? The primary document that I tend to see folks using are PDFs. So any kind of PDF, like a PDF of a chapter or a journal article, something like that, you can load into Canvas and use with hypothesis. An open textbook or open educational resource, whether that's a PDF, like an OpenStax book, or a URL of like a press book, so you can use that. A web page or an online article that's public facing. I think you might have noticed I closed it. This data science example is actually, and this chemistry one, this is a website, they're annotating a website, but it's still private in Canvas. Those annotations aren't available publicly on the web. And then finally, like I said, we added the YouTube video transcript annotation, and then we also have JSTOR and vital source availability, but we might have to check in on what the status is at your school. And then what can you put in an annotation? So we have two sides here. We have what kinds of documents can you annotate, and then what types of media can you add to annotations itself? Most people tend to lean into text and just annotating with text, but I think hypothesis offers a great opportunity to make the text turn into a multimodal experience for students. So they're not limited to reading text, but they can bring in images and videos that help them better understand what they're reading. So you can embed images into annotation. You can embed videos like we saw with that law of conservation of momentum example. You can use LaTeX to add equations to annotations. And you can also add links to external URLs, and you can use tags. And thank you, Gina. So you can use JSTOR articles as well, and have students annotate JSTOR articles without having to go to the library database. So again, this can really help students understand text in a broader sense. I worked with a theater professor recently who was saying that she has her students read plays, and in the annotations, she'll add videos, YouTube clips of those scenes being acted out, or she'll add, set design examples as images. So we can bring a lot of resources onto the reading so students don't have to hop out and find different things in different places and engage with those as part of the reading. One thing to note about PDFs is that they do have to have a selectable text layer to work in Canvas. I'm sorry, to work with hypothesis. That means basically if you open the PDF on your computer, you need to be able to copy and paste text out of the PDF in order to use the PDF with hypothesis. If you can't copy and paste text, that means hypothesis probably doesn't know there's text on the document. That happens a lot if someone has scanned a document. So if you have scanned an article into your computer probably just thinks that's an image. In that case, we have a resource for you, a website that is linked on the slide. It's called DocDrop. It's clearly very simple. You load your PDF into DocDrop, and it will give you a version that has selectable text that you can use with hypothesis. If your PDF started as a digital file though, so like if you type something in Word and then you saved it as a PDF, that is fine. You don't have to do anything extra with that. So usually if things start digital, then they're good to go. It's when they're starting analog and we're trying to convert them to digital where we can have some potential issues. Okay, so I'm going to demo how to set up a hypothesis assignment in Canvas. But before I do that, I want to point out that we do have links here, videos that will go over all the things I'm about to go over. So how to set up hypothesis readings through Canvas assignments, how to annotate YouTube videos with hypothesis in Canvas, how to grade hypothesis annotations in Canvas. All those instructions are linked in the slides if you need to reference them again. Neil had asked, what is a character limit for hypothesis annotation? I don't think there is one. They can write really long annotations. They don't tend to. Some of them will go on for a little bit, but I don't know if I've ever seen like an annotation that's broken anything. I don't know if that was an accidental hand or a real hand, Neil.
And that was accidental.
Okay.
I got a little excited.
Yeah, it's like, oh, my students can write so many things. Sometimes my students get real hype about like, I teach gender and technology. So if we talk about like Facebook censoring certain topics or something, they'll be like, oh my God, this happened to me. And then they go on this big rant and they do get into it. So I'm going to hop into my Canvas course. If I want my students to annotate a PDF file that I have in my Canvas course, I want to make sure that the file is already there. So I have some files here. I'm going to choose one of these files to annotate, but if your file isn't in Canvas yet and you want to pull it from Canvas files, you have to make sure it's here first. If you want to use a group assignment, you want to make sure that you set up your group sets in Canvas first. So I have some annotation assignment group sets set up. So all your Canvas things have to be in order before you set up the hypothesis assignment. So my Canvas things are in order. So I'm going to go to assignments. I will click on my plus assignment button, as I normally do, to add an assignment. And then I can type in, my assignment name. So I could call it week for reading, or I can, put in the article name. I tend to do a lot in my own course. And then I would like to add instructions for my students here. Again, prompting your students to annotate is important. You don't have to give them different specific questions for every annotation assignment, but telling them what kind of annotations are meaningful is really an important part of the process. So I'm going to copy and paste instructions into this content editor here about what students can do. Then I will choose how to grade it. So I have it set as complete, incomplete. You can, do whatever you would normally do for your grading. And then this is where hypothesis is like kind of already hiding in your Canvas course. In the submission type, you'll want to choose external tool from the drop-down menu. And then you'll click find. And then you'll have a list of tools here. Yours will look different due to it being a different canvas, but you'll find hypothesis in the list. And then you have selections, a place where you want to grab the file or the URL. So this is where I decide, am I going to drop in a URL? Do I want to grab the file from Google Drive or OneDrive? Do I want to pick a Canvas file or use a JSTOR article or a YouTube video? This list is getting very long. I am going to grab a file from Canvas. So I have my Pursuing Happiness text. I can find that in my Canvas files listed here. I'll click select. I'm going to leave this as a whole class assignment because it's really long text, but I'll show what the group assignment looks like in a moment. So if I leave this unchecked, that means this is the whole class annotating together. I'll click continue. And then I'll click select to finalize it. I like to click the load this tool in a new tab just to let students have more space to annotate, because otherwise it will embed hypothesis like in Canvas and it's like a little squished. That's a personal preference, but I check that off And then I can put in my due date and save. And now I have my instructions and my reading ready to go. So that is how I can set up my annotation assignment, and then students are ready to start annotating once this is published. So I want to also grab a YouTube video and go through this process, show you how the YouTube video annotation works, and then also look at the group functionality kind of at the same time. Looking at lots of stuff at once. But does anyone have any questions about that process as I grab a YouTube video in the background here? Okay. Looks like no questions. So I'm going to go again to assignments. So same process as before, except this time I'm going to use a YouTube video and I'm going to make it a group assignment. So I can put in my YouTube annotation assignment. I would always put in instructions. I'm going to skip this for the sake of time, but I will always have instructions for my students there. From the submission type, again, I'm choosing an external tool from the dropdown. And then I want to click find, click hypothesis, and then I will select YouTube for this option. So I can paste my YouTube URL here. It will let me know once I click on this little button that it can be used. So if the video does not have a transcript or if the video is age restricted, it's not going to work. So it'll kind of block you at this point if that's the case. And then I can click continue. I want to make this a group assignment. So I check that off and then select my group set that I want to use and continue again. And select to finalize. And then save. So this is what the YouTube transcript annotation looks like. When I play the YouTube video, it will play all the way on the left here. I have this muted just because I don't want it to talk over me. But the transcripts in the center will follow along with what is being narrated in the video. So you can see this white box is kind of moving along with the video. That's what's being spoken in the video right now. If I wanted to add an annotation, I can pause and I can select the text like I would any other document, click annotate, and then add an annotation. Click post, and then I can move on and click play to continue with the video. So how is this working as a group assignment? At the top of the annotation sidebar here, now this is a drop-down menu. So I have two groups here, and they have separate annotation spaces over the same video. So I annotated in the annotation assignment 1 group. If I switch to the annotation assignment 2 group, there are no annotations. So they are limited within their own groups. You as the instructor can toggle between the different groups. The students cannot. They can only see their group's annotations. So that's what that group set functionality looks like. All right. Yes, do you have a question, Richard?
Thanks. Yeah. So my question is, if you create a hypothesis for groups, right, and they do their annotations, is there any way to shuffle those all back into a whole class scene document?
No, a lot of people ask for that, which would be nice, because then everyone will be able to see each other's annotations. But no, once they're in their groups, they can only see their groups. There wouldn't be a way to then kind of share those out with the class.
And since you're an expert, I'll just ask a quick question to see if you have run into a way to do this. So if I wanted to so there's one document and I've got a group of I've broken a class into groups of 3, and I want them to specifically look at one place, in the document and make some annotations or some replies to that one particular place. Is there any way for that, that group of 3 to do it and then everyone sees it? But I don't have to go in individually and give everyone their own individual grade, but could grade the group of 3 students?
You would still have to it's not giving a group grade. You'd have to give individual grades
Okay.
still.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no worries.
And then Tony asked in the chat, if the YouTube video doesn't have, it's actually looking for a transcript. The video would have to have the transcript natively. So I don't know if you're creating your own videos, Troy, and loading them into YouTube or adding the captions to videos that exist already, but they would have to be kind of native with the YouTube video itself. And we are working to expand the video options. This was released 2 weeks ago. We're hoping to have more options beyond just annotating the transcript in the future.
Okay, thank you. I have a combination of videos, ones that I do, but I build my own captions and transcript. But for online ones that are existing on YouTube that I do want my students to use, many of them aren't captioned and don't have a transcript. So I've used amara.com to do that for them. And so I think the Amara web page that shows it has access to a transcript, but I'm not sure if Hypothesis would be able to work with that.
Yeah, if it's not behind a login, it could work. I have had faculty in the past, before we release this, paste a transcript into a document, save it as a PDF, make that the hypothesis assignment, and then the students would just have to watch the video in a separate window. So it's a little clunkier, but that is how people have worked around it in the past.
Okay.
Could you take that new video and then that you created with your captions and transcript and then put it back into YouTube? Is that possible?
So if he doesn't have, if it was not his video on YouTube, you can't download a video out of YouTube legally.
So it has, so as long as it's his, he can do it. If not, okay.
Yeah. So just a couple considerations. I do want, some people are encouraging students to try ChatGPT. I just want to put these thoughts out there. If you have thought about doing that, there's a link to a great blog post about considerations of that. The ongoing availability of a free ChatGPT, it's unclear. And then the data that's being collected, also a little bit unclear. There are some resources on here that you can check out for further reading. So I want to wrap up just with some resources that you all have access to as a Hypothesis partner. There are resources for social annotation here. These are assignments that faculty have submitted that are very discipline specific. So I showed you general annotation setter assignments. You can see what people have submitted assignments for in very specific like nursing or biology or things like that, and see different assignment examples and how they grade. So those are great to explore. Hypothesis Academy is also something you have access to. If you want to take a deeper dive into Hypothesis, they're 2-week asynchronous courses where we look at the pedagogy of social annotation and we crammed a lot of information into this hour, right? So we kind of expand on those things a little bit more, and you work to develop your own annotation assignment that you can use in your class. We have 2 courses right now, Social Annotation 101 and Social Annotation in the Age of AI, and those cohorts are running through the semester. So you can register there. We also have lots of topics of workshops that are available for you weekly at 10 a.m. Pacific. I think next week we're doing annotate your syllabus if you're interested in looking at different ways to annotate course documents that might not just be limited to like a textbook. So we have lots of different topics that are available each week. And then my email is at the very end of the slide deck as I slide in 1-2 minutes before the end of our hour together. So please, if I can help you with hypothesis, feel free to reach out. We can walk through setting up a Canvas assignment together. We can brainstorm how it might work best in your class if you need someone to bounce ideas off of, since I've worked with a lot of faculty that use this. There are lots of ideas and lots of different ways you can implement it. I'm always happy to help, but I will follow up with the recording and the slides tomorrow because I'm going to go eat dinner right after this, but I will follow up and then you'll have my contact info so you can reach out. But any final questions? That was a whirlwind of AI, hypothesis, other stuff. Thank you all for joining today. It was a good session with y'all.